Welcome to the Mind Solution Podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution Podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution Podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hi there, I'm Sarah Maud and welcome to another episode of the Mind Solution Podcast, but this time with a difference. Now, if you've been following the Mind Solution Podcast for the last few years, you'll have heard me talk a lot about well-being in the workplace. And during that time, I've been delighted to talk to some amazing business leaders about their own experience of mental health, talking about well-being in the workplace, talking about well-being strategy, leadership, inclusion, belonging, just to name a few. And I've also been absolutely thrilled and honoured to have been joined by incredible thought leaders such as Jamie Smart, Dr. David Hamilton and Dr. Amy Johnson, where together we've taken a deep dive into consciousness, into the nature of thought, into the human mind, where we've unpacked more about what's really creating our experience, showing us that we're not victims of circumstance. And in part, it's thanks to those conversations that I've made a decision to take this podcast in a very different direction, and one that I'm trusting, fingers crossed, that you're going to join me on. Because the direction that we are now going in is one of spirituality in business. Yes, you did hear that correctly, spirituality in business. Now, I'll be honest with you, when I first had this insight to talk about spirituality in business, my ego threw a hissy fit. In fact, it threw quite a big tantrum. And it started throwing at me all kinds of objections. Started saying, come on, Sarah, what do you know about spirituality in business? You can't talk about that. That's not safe. If you start talking about spirituality in business, this could go very wrong. This could blow up in your face. Just stick to your comfort zone. Just keep talking about well-being in the workplace. Keep talking about mental health. You're good at that. You've been doing that for more than a decade. But actually, it's the fact that my ego kicked up such a fuss, trying to do its best to stop me from talking about spirituality in business, that gave me that inner sense that this is exactly what it is that I need to be talking about. So I'd love to kick off today with a quote from Marianne Williamson, who says, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us." And I just love this quote. It resonates with me so much that it's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. So it might be a good place to actually talk to you about my own philosophy about spirituality. And by no means am I claiming to be any kind of spiritual guru. In fact, even if I wanted to be, I don't think I could be considered a spiritual guru because I swear, I drink too much red wine and I'm not a vegan. So I think I'm safely ruled out from the guru category. But my own philosophy about spirituality is actually, I would say, quite a simple one. For me, I believe that we are more than just a physical body, that we are created from an infinite intelligence, a divine intelligence that's there, that's guiding us. And that if we work with that infinite intelligence, we can have the most magical experiences. That it's that infinite intelligence, that energy, that source that's connecting each and every one of us. And I feel very blessed to say that I've experienced that really divine sense of who I am. And when I say who I am, I'm not talking about my personality. I'm not talking about the identities that were created about who I thought I was, but really experiencing the energy of that life force, really feeling that in my being, feeling that in my heart, feeling my soul. And it's my intention that in talking about spirituality in business, that we can bridge the gap, that we can help people be pointed to the truth of who we really are. And when I say who we really are, it reminds me of another quote by Steve Jobs, who said, in order for you to fulfill your purpose, the world needs you to be who you are. And try and copy someone else or act like someone else you're not will only limit your contribution. And so when I think about that quote, what really stands out for me are the words, the world needs you to be who you are. But that question, who am I? That's like the $64 million question for so many. Because I've heard so many people talk about, I don't really know who I am. People that feel very lost, feel very disconnected from life, feel very disconnected from themselves, very disconnected from their body. People that feel like they're just living in survival. People that feel like they're just on a treadmill, they're just going through life. That they're not really living their true potential. They're not being true to who they really are. So I'm super excited about the potential that this podcast has in creating real transformation. And transformation in the workplace. A transformation that has the power to create a ripple effect where we can connect with each other at a much deeper level. That we can create kinder, more loving environments where we're all shining our light because we have the understanding of actually who I am. And I really want people to see that we are not just a body going through life, but that there is a greater intelligence, an infinite intelligence that we're all connected to. And the more that I see that for myself, and the more that I point the people that I work with, the people that I talk with, to that understanding, the more that they're getting into the flow of life instead of constantly finding themselves bucking up against the current. And my own journey with spirituality started at quite a young age. It started when I was about 21, when I read the Celestine Prophecy. And the Celestine Prophecy, which was written by James Redfield, gave me my first glimpse into human consciousness. It gave me my first glimpse to see that I wasn't just this physical body going through life. It taught me about energy. It taught me about creation. It taught me about synchronicity, how events unfold. It started to give me that glimpse into who we really are, which is incredibly powerful creators. Now, I can't say that I intentionally turned my back on that, but as I entered into my career, as I entered into the world of HR, I kind of just found myself swept up, like so many people in life. I found myself swept up in my career, living my life. But actually, because I shelved that understanding, and trust me when I say we need to hear something more than once before we can really live from that understanding, before we can embody it, I kind of fell back into my default setting. I fell back into living my life based on who I thought I was, based on an identity, based on what I considered as my personality. And actually, the way that I was living my life was very much from a place which I didn't see at the time, but I was living my life from a place of lack, from a place of feeling like I wasn't enough. And whilst I couldn't really conceptualize that feeling, I could sense that feeling within me. I could feel that there was kind of something missing. And that I thought at the time that in order to fill that gap, I needed to prove myself. I needed to validate myself. I needed to excel. I had this belief that I needed to be seen to be perfect, whatever perfection was. I don't think I really categorically had an idea of what perfection was, but I pushed myself harder. And I was so hard on myself. But in coming back, as my journey's taken me, coming back to really understand what was going on, I can now see far more clearly than I've probably ever been able to see over the last 25 years, that I was just living based on an identity. And an identity that was created at a very young age. I was living my life based on who I thought I was. I was living from old habitual thought patterns. And that was getting in the way of me being true to who I really was. But I consider that this journey that I've been on, it's like the universe always had this sense of what my path was in life, what my purpose was, my calling, or whatever it is that you want to see it as. And it brought me back to this pathway. And it brought me back to it in 2011, when I started to study solution-focused psychotherapy and hypnotherapy, not with any intention of doing what I do now, but because I just genuinely had a fascination with the mind. And I thought, maybe in understanding more about psychotherapy and the mind, perhaps that can help me in my career. And I think it was about a third of the way into my training that I had this huge insight, this huge light bulb moment where I recognized that actually where we were missing a trick in the workplace was helping people to understand what was causing their experience, to help them really understand mental health, to really understand well-being, how to take care of ourselves. And at the time, I felt so passionate about taking this knowledge back into the corporate world, but I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. And at the time, I was working as an international HR business partner with Virgin Atlantic. And it got to about September, October time when the universe conspired in its wonderful and magical way to make my dream a reality. And it did that actually through Sir Richard Branson himself. But I'm going to save that story for another day. And so I left the world of HR as I knew it, and I set up a clinic and I started to work one-to-one with people, really taking all of this knowledge that I had about the mind, about the body, about change and transformation. And the more that I worked with people and the more that I studied and the more that I read books by just the most amazing authors and trainers like Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. David Hamilton and Wayne Dyer and Jill Edwards and Bruce Lipton, what I consider spirituality, I could really understand at a much deeper level about energy, about what is really creating our experience. I could really see that we aren't just dealing with life. We're not just dealing with the cards that we've been dealt. And I started to get more and more clear on who I was. I started to see that I wasn't just a personality. I wasn't just the identity that I'd created, but that I was something that was far greater than that. And over the last 10, 12 years, I've been talking a lot about well-being in the workplace and mental health, and I've been sharing tools and techniques about how to take care of ourselves. But it really strikes me that I can do that until the cows come home. But that isn't going to create a fundamental shift in how we show up. That's not what's going to create real, lasting transformation. Because what I know to be true is if people don't really know who they are beyond the level of the ego, beyond the level of the personality, beyond the level of the identity, then people are always going to be looking to the outside world to create something that's already there within us. You know, as I've heard Jamie Smart say numerous times, we have an innate capacity for resilience, that we have an innate capacity for well-being. But that actually what we're doing is we're experiencing life from the level of personality, from the level of identity, from the level of our ego, and that we're so caught up thinking that there's something about ourselves that needs fixing, that we see ourselves as broken, that there's something wrong with us. And I really see that because I experience that for myself. And so it's my intention that in talking about spirituality in business and bridging the gap between spirituality in business, that myself and the people that join me on this podcast and take people on a journey of discovery, on a journey of insight, which I absolutely believe in every bone of my body, every cell of my being will create the kind of transformation that's needed. And it's actually thanks to the time that I spent in the corporate world, in my HR career, that I can see why this is also needed so very much. Because from my experience of working in organizations, you know, I worked with some amazing organizations, some beautiful, authentic leaders. But more often than not, I worked in cultures where people weren't really being authentic. People weren't being true to who they were. I was surrounded by politics, by game playing, by bureaucracy, by drama, by ego, basically. People feeling the need to cover their back. People wearing masks. people that were dialing down who they really were for fear of not belonging, fear of not fitting in, fear of the consequences if they just let themselves shine and radiate. And you know, I hear so many people talk about inclusion and belonging, but what strikes me is if we don't really know who we are, and I don't mean who we are as in a label, but the truth of who we really are, then we're at risk of actually creating more division. That those labels about how we've identified with ourselves actually inadvertently create more separation instead of belonging. And over the last decade or more, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people as a solution-focused psychotherapist and hypnotherapist and EFT practitioner and as a coach and lots of other different things. But I've seen so many people who are struggling in the workplace, people that are really scared to shine their light, people that are scared to be vulnerable, people who've created beliefs about who they think they are, beliefs that were created at a very, very young age and have never been challenged, people that are very unaware, unconscious, and are like puppets on the string when it comes to the ego. And people that are very disconnected. And they're trying to do the best that they can, but they can only do that from their current level of thinking. And if they don't really understand who they are and what's creating their experience moment to moment, they're just going to keep doing what they've always done. And what I also see are people who have got beautiful, unique gifts that only they can give to the world, that they can give to business. But maybe they're not aware of those gifts. Maybe they're hiding those gifts. Maybe it doesn't feel safe in the environment that they're working in to allow those gifts to come out. You know, I actually remember having a conversation with a manager in one of the organizations that I worked in, and I would say it's fair to say, and I think you'd agree if you've ever spoken to me or worked with me, that I can get really passionate. I can get passionate about a lot of things. I'm a very passionate woman. And I think that that was sometimes viewed as disruptive. And I always remember talking to one particular manager and kind of voicing that, you know, am I seen as disruptive and not a troublemaker, but somebody that was quite vocal. And she said to me, and it always stuck to me, it's always stuck with me. She said, I don't think that you're difficult, Sarah. I think you're just very passionate. And that passion for me is what I would consider as one of my unique gifts. And the way that I bring that passion to life. Now, there might be lots of you out there that are very passionate, but the way that you bring that to life will all be a little bit different in that. But I found myself quite often dialing down that passion and sort of squashing it in because there was a fear that if I was a bit too passionate, then there would be consequences. But the organizations, the leaders which embraced that, allowed me to feel safe to bring that unique gift out, I flourished. I thrived. And it kind of reminds me of the story of the golden Buddha, which I was recently reminded of. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, in 1957, an entire monastery in Thailand was being relocated by a group of monks. And one day they were moving this giant clay Buddha, which one of the monks noticed was there was a crack in the clay. So this huge clay Buddha. And when he looked a little bit closer, he saw that there was a light shining through this crack, a beautiful golden light emanating from it. And as the story goes, the monk then used a hammer and a chisel to just start to gently chip away at the exterior, chip away at the clay. And as he did, him and all of the other monks discovered that this beautiful giant clay statue was actually hiding what was underneath, which was a beautiful, solid, golden statue. Now, I love this as a metaphor because it really reminds me of what it is that we have inside us. Those gifts that we have to bring to the world, the truth of who we really are. But that all of that gets hidden. Just like those layers of clay, the masks that we wear, the masks that we hide behind. That clay that's formed into identities based on past experience. And how we just keep showing up because, we're operating from that level of the unconscious mind 96-98% of the time. So we're a little bit like we're on autopilot. We don't necessarily think we're on autopilot, but we just keep replaying the same behaviors, the same repetitive thoughts, the ideas that we've made up about ourselves, the assumptions that this is who I am. It's just my personality. I was born this way. But that when we're living a life that's based on who we think we are, from the level of the identity, from the level of the personality, then we're not being true to who we really are. Going back to that Steve Jobs quote, the world needs you to be you. And what I also hear, which really chimes with this, is where organizations talk about bringing your whole self to work. Now that term, bring your whole self to work, for me, I find that really interesting because I'd love to understand, what does that actually mean? Because I'm willing to guess, that bringing that whole self to work is the self that is the personality. Is the self of who they're identifying with. And it isn't actually the whole self if people don't really understand who we are at a much greater level, a much, much greater level than consciousness. Now, I'm not suggesting that there are aspects of me and my personality that I wouldn't want people to experience. And that passion, that authenticity, somebody that's not afraid to stand up for what I believe in, somebody that's intuitive, that tries my very best to live from my heart, doesn't always get that right, someone that's honest. I consider those my unique gifts, and that when I'm in the room, that's what people notice. But they also come from that understanding of who I'm also about. That light that Marianne Williamson points us to. And so it's not that we don't have these beautiful qualities and these gifts and these traits, but the self that I'm pointing to is before all of that. It's the formless, it's that pure consciousness. And what I'm really excited about pointing people to is the more that we see that, the more that our gifts, our whole self can really shine, can really, really radiate. And more that we can experience this notion of bringing the whole self to work from a very different perspective, a very different level of consciousness. Instead of people just showing up from the internally generated perceptual reality based on their inner map of the world that's been formed on beliefs and experiences and traumas and identity. And if we don't have that understanding, then we're limiting ourselves. We're limiting the people that work in our organizations. And if I think about so many leadership courses, for example, that focus primarily on behavior, well, if we don't really understand what's creating our experience, then just focusing on trying to change a behavior is a bit like playing a losing game, because as I mentioned, 98% of the time we're operating from a very unconscious level. A place of insecurity, from a place of I'll be happy when. And the more that you see the world through that lens, the more that you're going to look to the external world, to the external environment for answers. Go into Google, how do I become more confident? How do I become happier? How do I experience peace of mind? How do I become more successful? How do I overcome impostor syndrome? How am I going to feel good about myself? What's going to make me feel like I'm good enough? But going on that kind of quest actually works on the belief that you don't have what it is that you're already looking for. That everything that you desire, those feelings of joy and happiness and confidence, everything is already within you. So when we're looking to the external world to make something outside of ourselves, try and make it feel what it is that we're looking for, then that's a little bit like looking for love in all the wrong places. And actually, in that searching for how do I feel more confident, how do I feel this, that, and the other, it takes us further and further away from what is already within us. And so I would love to close today's podcast by sharing with you a passage that comes from the book The Missing Link by Sydney Banks. And Sydney says that thoughts are the best special effects department going. If you think something, it's going to appear to be real. If you're thinking in the moment and you're believing in the moment, if you believe you are feeling something other than you're thinking, it's going to look like that. If you're believing that you're feeling something other than you're thinking, you give the world out there power over your feeling, and that can feel a very disempowering place to be. So it then becomes very important to try to control the outer world, to manage, to manipulate, to try and control every outcome, to try and get the feeling, the experience of life that you want. And implicit in that is separation. A head full of thought is urgency, is insecurity. So as soon as you start believing that you're feeling something other than you're thinking, insecurity is inevitable. And that connection to life is going to seem like it's not there. So thank you for joining me on what I trust is going to be a wonderful journey of exploration for you as a listener, as myself and guests continue to dive even deeper into this magical topic of spirituality in business. So thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.